Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Josh Zimmerman. I am the manager of learning and development here at GitLab. I'm really honored to be joined here with Sid and Brian, our CEO and CFO, to kick off our first ever CEO handbook learning session. And essentially, we're going to, with L&D and Sid and the rest of the E group, is have weekly discussions about particular handbook pages and really deep dive what those mean and how to actually interpret those into your day-to-day role. And so today we're going to talk about embracing iteration and some common misconceptions about that. So Sid, Brian, thanks for being here today.
You're welcome. And maybe I'll kick it off with some misconceptions I've seen. I think the thing about iteration is you make something as small as possible to get it out there and get feedback. And that's feedback from the actual kind of end user of whatever work product you make. And I've sometimes see iteration being used at GitLab as a revision. Like, oh, I've revised a draft of something. I've iterated. A revision is not an iteration. The benefit of iteration is that you get feedback from the actual end users. Looking at your own proposal again and then improving it, or even asking feedback from colleagues if they're not the end user, that's not iteration. That's just revising your proposal. Iteration is getting it out there to the actual end users and getting feedback from them. And that can sometimes mean you release it to a smaller group or something like that, or you do part of the proposal. That is proper iteration, but a revision isn't. And it's very important that we make that distinction, because otherwise what we get is we have a whole bunch of revisions, but it turns out into one very long iteration and we don't have the time to listen to feedback. Another thing I've seen is the misconception that the quality of your first iteration matters. That's not the case. Like if you get early feedback, like, oh, this proposal is super bad, that doesn't matter. What we should have the attitude, like we're trying to achieve as much as possible in a limited set of time. And it's where we are at the end of that time that counts. So if we split that time up in 4 iterations and the first one's really bad, that doesn't matter because we have still 3 more to go. So it's the last iteration that counts, not the first iteration. It's the iteration at the time limit we set for how long we're going to work at this project that counts. And that should also be on the mind of people evaluating and hopefully set that context. Like if you say like, oh, well, this is really bad. That's okay if there's still time to do something else. Now, if they spend the entire lot of time and this is the first thing, then it's really bad. But if it's if there's still time to remedy fix, it shouldn't matter. The evaluation of the effort should be based solely on the end state, not on any intermediate states. Brian, any things that you've observed or any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Sid. Being relatively new to the company, seeing iteration work has been fascinating because, when things are documented and broken down into small pieces and get commented on by other team members, there's a true value of, iterating, create more value. I think some areas where I've seen iteration not work as well is when things don't get documented. And or people aren't iterating and there's not really a agreement on what the end objective may be. It doesn't have to be concrete, but in order to iterate towards a common goal, it's important that the iteration and discussion actually occurs. And I think the output of that is greater efficiency and greater communication. So if you're working on a project with your other team members and you're feeling that there's a lack of iteration, which is causing delays or inefficiency or making things take longer, I would encourage you to encourage them to document and to start iterating.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think a telltale sign of a lack of iteration is if there's more information about like a future wished for state than the state at the end of the iteration. I've seen something this week where it was like the future state, like this is where we want to be in a year, was there was a good overview of that, but there wasn't a clear overview of where we want to be in a month.
I think that's a great example, Sid.
And I'm curious, just, what's the best method to communicate iteration? Is that through an MR? Is it through a Google Doc? I just want to reiterate, hear that from you all. It's probably through a merge request, but just to make it clear for everyone listening.
It depends. It's something that that is the final state of the work. So if you think about, okay, I have to achieve this, and when it's all said and done, if it's all said and done, and you're going to engrave it in the stones in front of your building, then that is the iteration. So that means now you got to engrave it in the stones in front of your building 5 times. So you got to get creative. Maybe the first time we engrave only a few, or we figure out if we can flip the stones after we've engraved it. And maybe you dial it down a little bit. Maybe the first time you use a projector to see how it looks. You can dial it back a little bit. But I'd go for just do, if you're going to do, I don't know, we're engraving in front of the building and it's going to be graphics, just do ship a smaller graphic first. And it turns out that the color is off. And if people walk across it, that the color gets worse. And there were weird fumes while it was being painted. And the paint dried up in the airline. So we got to use a different mixture. And you're encountering all these problems early on. And it's not a big problem because we can just spray over that first one and put a bigger graphic on top of it. But not iterating would be like working on the design really long, planning to get all these people involved, and then having the last day and then having 30 contractors all spraying the entire day, and then figuring out that the mixture is wrong or that if you walk across it, it gets fake.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Sid. I think another thing it'd be great to expand on is, there are many ways to iterate, but also while you iterate, there's one-way doors and two-way doors. Could you elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think to explain the concept of one-way and two-way doors are like most decisions in a company. It's relatively easy to reverse. Doesn't mean that your effort is lost or something like that, but it's easy to stop doing it. A one-way door is something that is much harder to change because there's a huge costs associated with it. A typical example is changes to the pricing of your product. You don't want to be communicated a pricing change and then the reverse pricing change in a while. Another example would be in compensation. It's easy to give bonuses and then at some point change how you structure that bonus for the new fiscal year. It's really painful if you hire people and then no longer need those people and you have to let them go. It's really important to recognize when something is a one-way or a two-way door and to be explicit about that. And I think in general, people tend to say oh, this is a one-way door, even though it isn't. No, it's something we can change, something where we can dial the effort back or the expense back, and it's not a big problem. But sometimes you have one-way doors, and then it's can you find the iteration within that? For example, if you have a pricing change, make sure you test the pricing change with actual customers giving feedback. And that can be in a confidential setting or something like that. Look, you can't get the response from 100% of your customers, but then at least get it from some percentage of your customers.
Thanks. I think that's great. It's very important.
So if we just, I think we answered question 3, what is not iteration? Okay. I think if we jump down to question 4, like, I think one thing that I hear from team members is embracing iteration and really feeling comfortable iterating. It can be uncomfortable, it can be difficult. And one thing I wanted to highlight is just having that low level of shame, as well as, how can managers enable their people to iterate? And I would love to hear from you and Brian on maybe some strategies that team members can actually implement to embrace iteration.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Really important. Also important to recognize that many people are different. It's different across people, different across cultures. Apart from all the usual things you do, like negative feedback should be in the smallest possible setting. That doesn't always mean one person. Like if multiple people made a proposal, you want to give all of them the feedback about the proposal. It's really important to stress that the end result counts, like at the end of the allotted time for this project. So if someone sends you something early and it's not good, like praise them for like, oh, thanks for getting this to me early, while there was still ample time to kind of make it better. I think the biggest problem is if people think they're being evaluated based on the first iteration instead of the final iteration. And then if you are presenting work, make sure the status is clear. Like, this is a status. This is what we're doing. We're only painting like one mural, even though we're going to do 1,600 eventually. The project is only 2 weeks in, and we still have 10 weeks to further improve this. Like in that case, like, I don't know, if I walk over it and it sticks to my shoes, I understand that it's fine, because this was just the first try, and let's hope it wears off on the shoes and have some slippers ready for me to hop into. But I think presenting the status becomes much more important. Like if it's iteration 1 of 10, the evaluation and the consequences should be very different than if it's iteration 10 out of 10.
I agree with that, Sid. This is Brian. The other thing I think is super important is to create sort of a safe zone for people to iterate, and rapid iteration and making small changes is always welcomed, and be able to give feedback or reviewing that in a very timely fashion. And if the iteration or the ideas aren't accepted, that's okay. We as a company will only get better with all the input of all team members, and that's why everyone can contribute, and that's which is really important to the culture of the company. And so I think making it a safe zone, having the two-way doors that we discussed, and encouraging your team members to iterate, I think is important.
Yeah, proposals are always welcome. Yesterday, the day started off with a proposal. It was a no-go, like it wasn't a workable idea, but I hopefully communicated to those people, like, I really appreciate you coming with it. Even more important, criticism is always welcome, even if it's not valid. It's always fine to bring it up. And we should never retaliate for proposals or criticism. Bad work that is like that there's no time to fix this, that can have consequences. Results count at GitLab, but input, proposals, criticism should never be held against a person.
Yeah, those are great points. I think creating an environment that's really, it's part of our job to make iterations, to make small changes, to have that low level of shame. And I think it's really on everybody in the company, but especially managers and leaders, to build that environment that's really based on trust and getting to know your people on a personal and a professional level so that they can iterate and feel comfortable doing it. I think that's really important, to have those two-way doors, kind of like what Brian was mentioning. So awesome. Well, is there anything else you would like to add just around embracing iteration before we head out?
I think we're done.
Cool.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, everyone.